So again, throughout the Old Testament, it was prophesied that salvation would come to the Gentiles. Now, it doesn't tell us how or what that will look like, but just that the Gentiles will turn to the Messiah of Israel for salvation. Jesus also alluded to this in his teachings in the New Testament. For example, in John chapter 10, verse 16, Jesus talked about having other sheep. And other sheep I have, which are not of this fold. Them also I must bring, and they will hear my voice, and there will be one flock and one shepherd. Jesus says, I've got other sheep that are not part of the fold of Israel. Speaking of the Gentiles, Jesus taught parables that spoke of the Gentiles being included in salvation. For example, in Luke chapter 14, he told this parable of the great supper, where a certain man gave a great supper, a huge celebration and feast, and he invited many. And those invited guests, when it was time for the supper, the invited guests rejected his invitation. And they began to make excuses as to why they couldn't come to the great supper. And the host was angered by this. And so the host told his servant to just go out quickly into the streets and lanes of the city and bring in the poor and the maimed and the lame and the blind, because the meal was ready, the food was prepared. And the invited guests refused to come. And so he says, go invite other people. Just go find some people and invite them in. And so the servant did. And then the servant went to the master and said, it is done as you commanded, and there's still room. There's still empty seats at the feast. And so the master said to his servant, well, then just go out into the highways and the hedges and compel them to come in, that my house may be filled. The original guests that were invited that made excuses and refused to come to the supper, they represent the religious leaders of Israel who rejected Jesus Christ. And the people, the common people, the maimed, the lame, the poor, that were out in the streets that were invited, that did come in, that represents the common people of Israel. The common people received Jesus gladly, the Gospels say. But then there was still more room. And so the servant went out into the highway and just invited anybody who happened to be passing by. Hey, there's this great feast. You're welcome to come and join us. They represent the Gentiles being invited in to the kingdom of heaven. So even Jesus alluded to the salvation of the Gentiles. Salvation opening to Gentiles was always God's plan. Again, we see that with the Old Testament prophecies. Salvation opening to the Gentiles was always God's plan. God did not come up with a new plan after Israel rejected Jesus Christ. This is not plan B for the Gentiles to get saved. It's not like God said, well, I didn't expect Israel to turn my offer down. Well, maybe go try the Gentiles, see what they say. No, God in his foreknowledge knew that Israel would reject his son Jesus Christ, and that he would then open salvation to the Gentiles. And so Israel's rejection of Jesus Christ is a temporary fall, and now because they have rejected Jesus Christ, salvation is opened to the world. And God is saving people all over the world. In the Old Testament book of Genesis, if you're a note taker, you can jot this down. But in the Old Testament book of Genesis, the story of Joseph is a picture of the gospel and God's plan of salvation for the world and for Israel. If you remember the story of Joseph, Joseph was one of the 12 sons of Israel, from which came the Jewish people. And initially, Joseph's brothers despised and rejected Joseph, and they sold him into slavery. And Joseph ended up in Egypt, and through divine providence, Joseph rose to become the second in power in the land of Egypt. And then during a time of famine, because of Joseph's position, Joseph was able to save many, many people, because this famine affected the whole region, and people from all over that region came to Egypt for food. And so Joseph was able to save many, many people. And then Joseph's own brothers came to Egypt seeking food. And Joseph was revealed to his brothers, the sons of Israel. And he was able to save the children of Israel also. Remember, Joseph famously said, "What you intended for evil, God has used for good." And Joseph is a picture of Jesus Christ. Israel's rejection of Jesus Christ opened up salvation to the Gentile world. Now many, many people are getting saved through Jesus Christ, the one that Israel rejected. And in the future, Israel will recognize their brother Jesus as the Messiah, and then Israel will be saved also by Jesus Christ. So it's a picture of what we're talking about here, the salvation of the Gentiles and the salvation of Israel. Look again at verse 11. Paul tells us one reason God is saving Gentiles is because Gentiles are so wonderful. Is that what it says? No. God is saving Gentiles, look what it says, to provoke the Jews to jealousy. That is, that Israel would be jealous for the relationship that Gentile believers have with their God, with the God of the Jews, through the Jewish Messiah, Jesus Christ. That the Jews would see the wonderful, joy-filled relationship that Gentile Christians enjoy with their God and want the same relationship with their God for themselves.